Hi everybody. I hope you are doing super well today, and today's video is dedicated to particular verbs ending with er. I told you in my first ever video, in my channel, that 80% of the verbs ends with er. I recommend you watch that video before this one, if you haven't watched it yet. Otherwise, you will learn in this video the exceptions for some verbs ending with er. Alright, let's get started with the verb ending with er. So the main question is, how to conjugate a verb ending with er in present tense. It starts the same way as in conjugation video number 1, and if you haven't seen it, go check it out to understand better the basics of conjugation of verbs ending with er. Anyway, the first thing to do is finding the radical, as we can see with the verb
manger.
You need to remove the er termination to find the radical. The second and last step is to add the right termination, and you are going to see that it's almost the same as the classic terminations. I wrote the difference in green, in that way, you can identify what changes are made. Therefore, for the first singular person, we add an e letter, and we are going to see an example just after the terminations. The second singular person is the same as we have seen in the first conjugation video. The third singular person is the same as the first one. And here is the difference between the classic termination and the termination for the verb ending with er. We add an e before the classic termination, and the reason for this is to simplify the pronunciation. I will show you with an example later on. The next one is the same as usual. You can see that the last plural termination doesn't change as well. So in fact, there is only one difference, which is adding an e at first plural person, before the usual termination. Now let's see an example, with the verb to eat.
Manger. Je mange. Tu manges. Il, elle mange.
Depending if we are speaking about a man or a woman.
Nous mangeons.
With the e that I wrote in green, and that makes the difference. By the way, if it was written without the e letter, we would say
Nous mangeons.
But the correct pronunciation sounds better.
Nous mangeons. Vous mangez. Il mange.
So that's all you need to know about the verb ending with er. Alright, now you are going to learn the specificity about verbs ending with sir. Therefore, same question as in the last part, how to conjugate a verb ending with sir? You are going to see that there is only one thing that changes. First thing is that we use the same terminations as usual. You will see them a lot in today's video, so you can be sure not to forget them. The second thing to be done is to replace the C by C cedilla, when there is an O after it. I speak about the C that is right before the termination. Let's see this with a concrete example with the verb, to start in French.
Je commence. Tu commences. Il commence. Nous commençons.
Here you can see that we use the C cedilla, because after it there is an O. This changes the pronunciation because without C cedilla, we would pronounce this word.
Nous commençons.
By the way, it's not in every word that we use the C cedilla. We are speaking about conjugating verbs ending with sir. We use it also on other cases, but I will make videos about it.
Vous commencez. Il, elle commence.
Now, it's time to learn the particularities about verbs ending with er, in present tense. How do we manage to conjugate those verbs? The first step is to conjugate with usual termination. By the way, for all of the different verbs ending that we see today, we always use the usual termination. The change or changes in the verb are always before the terminations. The change is that you have to replace the last y letter by I, except for the two first plural person. Let's see an example with the verb to wipe. So as I said, we replace the y letter by I.
J'essuie. Tu essuies. Il, elle essuie.
Here we don't replace the y by I, because it's the first plural person, therefore we have.
Nous essuyons.
Again, the second plural person is written with a y.
Vous essuyez. Ils, elles essuient.
Alright, what about learning the penultimate case in today's video, the verbs ending with eller or etter, in present tense? Same question as usual, how do we conjugate them? Again, we conjugate with the usual terminations. I'm sure you know them pretty well with all the times you've seen them in this video. The second step is to double the latest l or t, except for the two first plural person. You are going to see it with this example, with the verb to throw away.
Je jette. Tu jettes. Il, elle jette. Nous jetons. Vous jetez. Il, elle jette.
Unfortunately for you, there are some exceptions for this rule. You can see that I wrote all the verbs that are exceptions, but in fact, there are some verbs that I didn't even know and used them, so what I suggest you is to memorize the verb that you use like, to buy, to redeem, to freeze, and maybe some others that are useful in your life. Anyway, how do we conjugate those verbs? First, important thing is that the exceptions are conjugated all in the same way. There is not one way for each of those verbs, and we start by conjugating them with the usual terminations. After that, the only thing you have to do is to replace the latest e by e with a grave accent, except for the two first plural person where you don't have to change anything. What about an example? With I believe the most used verb in the exception list, the verb to buy.
J'achète. Tu achètes. Il, elle achète. Nous achetons. Vous achetez. Ils, elles achètent.
Last part, you are going to learn today is when there is an e at the penultimate syllable. Next you will have a summary that will be really helpful to see all the rules we have seen today. First, we have seen in the previous part, the eller and etter, in fact the first e is at the penultimate syllable, but what we are going to see is not referring to the eller and etter ending verbs. Anyway, how do we conjugate those verbs? That's the question we are going to answer. As we have seen many times, the terminations of the verb conjugated remain the same. The second thing to be done is to replace the e by e with a grave accent, except for the first plural pronoun, which means that you have to conjugate those verbs the same way than the exceptions for eller and etter verbs. Here is an example with the verb to bring.
J'amène. Tu amènes. Il, elle amène. Nous amenons. Vous amenez. Ils, elles amènent.
Alright, we have covered all the cases I wanted in today's video. Now it's time to show you a recap of everything, because there were a lot of information. Therefore, how do we conjugate them? Well, it depends on how the verb ends. If the verb ends by -er, we add an e between the radical and the termination, but this is only for first plural. We have seen that with the verb to eat, and the conjugation were with an e between the G and O letters. Also, you have learned the specificities about the verbs ending by -er, and in this case, you have to replace the latest C by C cedilla for the first person plural exclusively. We have done it the verb.
Commencer.
What about the verbs ending by -er? Well, you need to replace the Y letter by I except for the two first person plural. This one is probably the hardest one as there are exceptions, the verb ending by eller or etter. If the verb is not an exception, you have to double the latest L for eller verbs, or double the T for etter verb except for the two first person plural. If it's an exception, then you need to replace the E by E with a grave accent, except for the two first person plural, where you have to let the E letter. The last case that we have seen is the verbs with an E or an E with an acute accent at the penultimate syllable, and if it's not eller or etter. In this case, we replace the E by E with a grave accent, except for the two first person plural. I know it's complex, but I tried to be as synthetic as possible. Now let's move on to the last part, exercise. Hoping it helps you to memorize what you have seen today. So the exercise is a right or wrong questionnaire. In fact, you have to decide, if the verb is well conjugated, the rest of the sentence is mandatorily right. The first sentence is,
Nous mangeons du pain.
Is it right or is it wrong? The sentence is wrong. Do you know why? The sentence is wrong, because it's a verb ending by -er and for the first person plural, we add an E letter before the termination. Also, if there were no E letter, we would pronounce it.
Nous mangeons.
But the correct pronunciation is,
Nous mangeons.
the next sentence is,
Nous prononçons l'alphabet.
would you write it the same way? It's right. We have seen that for the verb ending by -er, we replace the C by a C cedilla, for the first person plural. What about this new sentence?
Je me noie.
It's wrong. We have seen the rule about verbs ending by -er. We have seen that we replace the Y letter by an I, except for the two first person plural where the Y stays. According to you, is this sentence correct?
J'épelle ce mot.
If you said yes, it's wrong. Do you remember the rule for verbs ending by eller or etter? As you can see in the correction below, we double the latest L letter, except for the two first person plural. And the last sentence.
J'achève les travaux.
I finished the work. Would you write it the same way? This one is correct. We are in the case of the E letter at the penultimate syllable, and it's not eller or etter ending verbs. Therefore, we replace the E letter by E with a grave accent except for the two first person plural, where we don't replace anything. Alright. So, it's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if it's the case, you can press the like button, subscribe to receive notifications when I post new videos, and also share this video with people interested in learning French. Thank you for watching. See you soon.